What's up guys, Chris here from Mainely Mesh. Today we're going to talk about what makes the perfect lacrosse pocket. Now you guys might be expecting this video to be about some crazy fancy technical stringing technique. I think you guys might be surprised by how simplistic this series is and by how much of it is predicated upon the actual construction of the head more so than the mesh or strings or stringing style or anything like that. The first thing I consider when trying to string the perfect lacrosse pocket is the face shape. When people say face shape, what they mean is that if I have the head facing me, what is this curvature? There are a whole host of different face shapes available on the market. You have more on the defensive spectrum, which might start low and flare up high, kind of the intermediate heads that also have kind of a mid flare point, a little bit wider. And then you have some more aggressive minded heads that might flare a little higher up in the head and stay as pinched as possible lower in the pocket. As an offensive player, obviously what I am going for is ball retention, right? I do not want to lose the ball from my stick once I have possession of it. And in my opinion, this shouldn't be something that just offensive players want. Obviously, I hate it when my long pulls turn over the ball as well. So for me, one of the single most important characteristics of a perfect pocket is ball retention. How well does that ball stay in my stick? People a lot of times think that this means that the stick has a ton of hold, maybe more whip. That's not necessarily true. What most determines ball retention is if you can keep the ball in the most narrow part of the stick. More so than hold, more so than grip, the single biggest advantage to keeping the ball in your stick is this extra, essentially 2 inches of plastic that's above the ball, right? I'm cradling typically. I'm not just holding my stick in a static, flat motion. And in that cradle movement, if the ball is partially dislodged, the likelihood of the ball bouncing around, hitting this plastic and then returning back to the pocket is much higher in the more narrow portion of the head than it is at the wider portion of the head. For example, if I look at this stick, right, the ball might be placed a little bit higher in the pocket. And if I look at how wide that section is, if I imagine the ball bouncing out, it's much more likely to just go into open air and thus fall out of the stick. Versus if I can contain it in a much more narrow portion of the head, if the ball bounces out as I'm cradling, much more likely to be caught by this plastic and return back into my pocket where I want it to be. Now, some of you probably have your heart rates up thinking, oh my gosh, that means I should never have a high pocket. I understand that some people enjoy the feeling of the ball sitting higher in their stick. I'm not gonna discredit high pockets right now, don't worry, but there's a lot more ball retention that's available at this thinnest point of the head. So that's the first thing I'm considering. There are 2 more things, so don't panic yet. The second thing I am considering when trying to construct the perfect lacrosse pocket is my bottom rail profile. So here I'm talking about the curvature of the bottom rail. Once again, there's a whole variety of curvatures out there. We've got something as extreme as the Ultra Power, which slopes down, hits its deepest point almost at the top third of the head. You've got something like the Epic Z1, which hits its lowest point in the bottom third of the head. You've got kind of flatter profiles like this PAL transition, that's a nice mid curvature. Then you've got like crazy defensive ones. Once again, lowest point is at this top third. The reason I want to take this into account is because of offset. Now, offset is a term used to describe the distance from the lowest point of the bottom rail from the actual plane of the shaft. Oh, I've got an old school head, this is perfect. Probably 20 or 30 years ago, I don't remember the exact date, heads didn't have an offset. Okay, if I look at where the bottom rail is here as compared to the shaft, it continues in more or less one straight line and is not offset. What that means is when I cradle, the ball is more or less staying on that plane of the shaft. It's not much removed from it. So it feels really awkward. You don't get this nice swinging motion. If you guys have never tried a non-offset head, I recommend it. It's a very weird feeling and it'll make you appreciate what you have in your offset even more. Compare that offset to a modern offset and you will see now we've dropped almost a full inch or 2 off of that plane of the shaft. And that's what gives us a nice consistent cradling motion and a nice ball feel. So when I'm trying to create the perfect pocket, I will have more ball feel the more offset that ball sits. For example, if I tried to make a high pocket in this head, naturally the ball would sit with a little less offset because this point of the bottom rail is a little bit higher than the lowest point, which is in this bottom third of the head. That slight decrease in offset is gonna make cradling feel a little bit less comfortable, a little bit less natural, and typically you're gonna have a little bit less satisfaction with the pocket overall. And this goes both ways. Let's say I have a more high pocket focused head. If I tried to put my pocket right at the throat of this ultra power, it would also feel really weird, right? Because I have less offset there, less ball feel. It's gonna be a lot more uncomfortable. Now you're understanding why certain heads are considered high pocket heads and certain heads are considered low pocket heads. Now where the frustration for me a lot of times comes in, and I'm gonna call you out, Hammer Omega. It's not the worst example of this, okay? But I've been over this with a lot of people, it's fine. They know. They know my gripes, they know my whines. If we combine those two things, if I want a high pocket head, what I am going to want is a head that is more narrow in this upper section, because I also want the deepest part to be in that upper section. And I need both of those things to coincide to get the most natural feeling pocket available. In this head, if I find the deepest point of the bottom rail, which is in this top third section, and then I flip it here, you're gonna notice this is a very wide section of the head. Okay, these things do not coincide. First of all, the mesh is going to be naturally deeper lower in the pocket. Second of all, in order to get a natural ball feel, I'm putting the ball in a much less secure point of the head and sacrificing a ton of ball retention. So in order to get that kind of optimal feeling pocket, I'm sacrificing a ton. So in reality, some of the most versatile heads are actually the ones with these long, flat bottom rails and these kind of low-grade flares. In this type of head, you do have a little bit more flexibility where you want to put that pocket. Now, there are some drawbacks in that you can't necessarily focus the pocket in one location. It's going to kind of stay in a few different spots and shift around a little bit. And frankly, that's the goal of a head like a Pioneer, right? That's what they're going for, is they believe the pocket should be everywhere, which is a totally legitimate belief and something I kind of channel into some of my pockets as well. Okay, so face shape, down. Bottom rail profile, down. Now we're actually talking about stringing. This point has a lot more to do with preference, but in my experience with Mainely Mesh, this is where we got our highest satisfaction ratings across all ages. A big advertising feature for a long time was quick release. It's kind of a bogus term. How long the ball takes to exit your pocket is purely dependent upon whip, right? So if I am shooting with two different heads, the ball can be in two different places, but if I'm going through the same exact motion and the ball is hitting the same spot, it's the same release time. If a ball released more quickly from my stick, it would have less whip and fly out of the pocket, right? If I'm using the same exact motion and the ball's leaving the same spot, same release time, period. Now, a term that Epic has coined that I think is more telling, if you ignore the quick release aspect, is travel. What travel is how far the ball will travel from its most comfortable point in the head to its exit point. Instead of a quick release and a slow release, I like to think of this more as a smooth release or a snappy release. Personally, I prefer a longer travel period in the head. I believe this gives you a little bit more energy transfer, a little bit more consistency. And the consistency is the most important part here, right? If I have, let's say, 6 or 7 inches of travel time in my stick, and keep in mind that's this length that the ball is traveling in the pocket, there's a little bit more room for error. Let's say it slightly catches on a shooting string, or there's a little bit of change in my release point. I have more time to kind of smooth that out. Whereas if I have a really short travel period, right, like say a 4-inch here, there's a little bit less room for error, right? If I make a little tweak to my motion, you could have a drastically different outcome in terms of where that ball is traveling. So actually, in keeping that travel distance in that kind of 6+ range, we're adding a lot of consistency. And so whereas I might shift this base pocket around by a 1/2 inch or so based on the actual construction of the head and the bottom rail profile and the face shape stuff we've already talked about, I'm trying to keep as much travel time as possible. And in the feedback I've had from thousands of customers over the years, that's one of the biggest compliments we got in our pockets, was that they were very consistent. Lastly, you might be thinking, okay, well, obviously people are different. People are different sizes. People are different strengths. How can one pocket therefore cover all of that different range of players that we see in the game of lacrosse, which frankly is one of the best aspects of lacrosse, is that any size and shape can play it and excel at it. This final step is where the magic of the stacked SI comes in. This probably merits an entirely additional video, but the stacked SI provides a little fail-safe for the actual range of athleticism seen in a variety of different players. What this does is it adds a little bit of hold right in this sweet spot of the stick that, depending on the elasticity of the mesh, will actually give a smidge more whip or smidge less whip based on how much force you are adding to the pocket. Now what I mean by that is that I can hand this to a 8-year-old player and he's gonna be able to throw without it catching too hard, right? It's got a long travel time and he's not adding much force to this pocket, therefore there's not gonna be much catch. Whereas if I handed him a pocket like this with a short travel time, high pocket placement, low margin of error, no toddler is going to be able to throw with this, period. They're going to throw into the ground, okay? That's just how it is. That doesn't mean that pro players can't snipe with this style of stick. They absolutely can. But it's limited to their range of talent level, strength, athleticism, you name it. Back to this stick, this more gradual profile with that stacked SI, kind of in that lower sweet spot of the stick, is capable of accommodating pro players and youth and everything in between. So the fastest I've ever seen anyone shoot with one of my pockets, and when I say that, not just one I strung, but just one of my kind of off the shelf random sticks, is I think in the 105 to 110 range, okay? Are you gonna be able to hit 115, 120 with it? Probably not. But if your upper limit is 110 miles an hour on a stick that you can also use when you're 8, I'm pretty happy with that range. This all ties into my theory of a gamer, whatever, where I want you using the same stick, getting the most muscle memory possible, and using that same profile over the duration of your career so you can dial in your muscle memory as much as possible with a stick that will also grow with you as you develop athletically, strength-wise, etc. Boom. That's your perfect pocket theory, okay? A lot of information there. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. Once again, notice how I didn't mention anything about channel, anything about hold, anything like that at all. We can address that in a slightly different video, and I'll kind of give you my basics to stringing the perfect pocket in a different video. There's kind of a rubric that I use that should help you guys out a lot, but this is the theory behind it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm starting to spill all my secrets. They were never actually secrets. I've just never sat down and put them all into one video. But thanks so much, guys. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Next video I will make will be the actual stringing mechanics of this. And then there's a few more before I get into some more funky kind of niche areas of theory and stringing and maybe tutorials if you're lucky. Thanks so much. I'll catch you guys next time.